Welcome to Boring History, where forgotten worlds come alive in whispers of time. Today, we journey back 600 years into the heart of ancient Babylon, the city of Marduk, where love, survival, and the rhythm of daily life unfolded under the watchful eyes of gods and kings. The grandeur of Marduk's Babylon was unlike anything the ancient world had ever witnessed, and to understand it, we must begin with the scale of the city itself, which stretched across the banks of the Euphrates River. Babylon was not only a center of power, wealth, and religion, but also the very heart of Mesopotamia, the land often described as the cradle of civilization. It was here that monumental architecture, carefully designed urban planning, and awe-inspiring religious devotion merged to create a city whose memory would echo across millennia. Babylon was more than a capital. It was a statement of human ambition and divine favor, an eternal reminder that the gods had chosen this place to manifest their will on earth. To speak of its grandeur is to explore the symbolic and physical ways it shaped the lives of all who walked its streets. The city walls were the first and most impressive sight to anyone approaching Babylon. Ancient records claim that they were so wide that a chariot drawn by 4 horses could race upon them without danger of falling. While historians debate the exact scale of these fortifications, what remains clear is that they represented both the might of the kingdom and the protective embrace of the gods. The walls were not just defensive barriers, they were expressions of authority, rising high to proclaim Babylon's dominance over its neighbors. The sheer labor required to build them, employing countless workers, engineers, and artisans, demonstrated the wealth and organizational capacity of the state. From a distance, the sight of these massive walls glistening in the sun would have filled visitors with both awe and humility. Within those walls, the city unfolded in a complex network of streets, markets, homes, and sacred precincts, all designed with order and function in mind. At its heart stood the ziggurat known as Itamananki, believed to be the inspiration for the later biblical Tower of Babel. This towering structure rose step by step into the heavens, its base firmly planted in the world of men, while its summit reached toward the realm of the gods. It was not only an architectural masterpiece, but also a spiritual symbol, reminding every Babylonian that their city was a bridge between earth and sky. The ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon, was a constant presence in the lives of citizens, visible from nearly every corner of the city, a reminder of divine order and cosmic authority. The grandeur of Babylon was also reflected in the processional avenues that cut through the city like arteries of ceremonial power. The most famous of these was the processional way, which ran from the outer city gates straight into the sacred precinct of Marduk. During religious festivals, this road would be lined with crowds of people, priests, soldiers, and dignitaries as statues of the gods were carried in lavish processions. The stones of the avenue were carefully laid, and the walls that lined it were decorated with brilliantly colored glazed bricks depicting lions, bulls, and dragons, symbols of divine strength and protection. These images were not merely decorative, but deeply symbolic, proclaiming the city's favored status under the gods and reminding all who walked there that Babylon was no ordinary city, but the chosen dwelling place of divine power. Among the gates of Babylon, none was more famous than the Ishtar Gate, one of the most dazzling examples of ancient craftsmanship. Clad in blue, glazed bricks, and adorned with reliefs of lions, bulls, and Ufu dragons, the gate served as both a defensive structure and a ceremonial entrance. To pass through it was to cross into sacred space, moving from the outer world into the beating heart of Babylon. The artistry of the gate reflected the wealth of the kingdom, as the glazed tiles were costly to produce and required specialized knowledge of firing techniques. More than just an entrance, the Ishtar Gate stood as a testament to the power of Nebuchadnezzar II, the king who expanded and beautified the city, ensuring that its magnificence would not only serve practical purposes, but also leave an enduring impression on all who beheld it. The grandeur of Babylon was not limited to its architecture, but extended into its political and cultural life. Kings such as Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar II shaped the identity of the city, investing in monumental projects that symbolized their authority. Hammurabi's famous Code of Laws was more than a legal document. It was a cultural landmark that demonstrated the city's role as a center of order and justice. Nebuchadnezzar II, centuries later, expanded Babylon into a metropolis of unparalleled splendor, commissioning vast palaces, temples, and gardens. Though the legendary Hanging Gardens remain debated by historians, their very association with Babylon speaks to the city's reputation for opulence and wonder. Babylon was not a city that merely functioned, it dazzled, impressing upon its inhabitants and visitors alike that they were living within a world power favored by the gods themselves. Markets and economic activity also reflected the grandeur of Babylon. The city was a hub of trade, attracting merchants from distant lands who brought goods ranging from fine textiles to exotic spices. Babylon's location along the Euphrates made it a natural center for commerce, connecting Mesopotamia with regions as far away as the Persian Gulf and Anatolia. The bustling energy of the markets, filled with the sounds of haggling, the sight of colorful wares, and the smell of fresh produce and incense, was itself a form of magnificence. Wealth flowed into the city, and this wealth enabled the construction of its great monuments, the patronage of its temples, and the flourishing of its culture. The religious grandeur of Babylon cannot be overstated. The city was home to hundreds of temples dedicated to a wide array of gods and goddesses, with Marduk reigning supreme. His temple, Asagila, was one of the most sacred structures in the city, a vast complex that included shrines, courtyards, and ritual chambers. Priests and priestesses played a vital role in maintaining the favor of the gods, performing daily rituals and grand ceremonies that kept the cosmos in balance. For ordinary Babylonians, the magnificence of these religious centers was both a source of pride and reassurance, a visible confirmation that their city was blessed by divine presence. The rituals performed here were not private acts of devotion, but public spectacles that reinforced Babylon's identity as the spiritual center of Mesopotamia. In addition to its religious and architectural grandeur, Babylon was also a center of intellectual life. The city produced advances in mathematics, astronomy, and literature that would influence cultures for centuries to come. The Babylonians developed sophisticated methods for tracking celestial bodies, creating star charts that allowed them to predict eclipses and planetary movements. These scientific pursuits were deeply tied to their religious worldview, as the heavens were seen as a reflection of divine will. At the same time, Babylon was home to scribes who preserved and transmitted knowledge, inscribing texts on clay tablets that have survived to this day. These works included myths, hymns, prayers, and legal documents, all contributing to the cultural richness of the city. The intellectual brilliance of Babylon was another facet of its grandeur, as it shaped the way future civilizations understood the world and their place within it. Even the daily life of Babylon reflected its magnificence, for to live in such a city was to be constantly surrounded by symbols of power and splendor. The houses of the wealthy were built with multiple rooms around central courtyards, decorated with fine materials that spoke of luxury. Public spaces were alive with activity, from markets and festivals to religious ceremonies and political gatherings. The grandeur of Babylon was not confined to its rulers and elites, but permeated the lives of its citizens, creating a shared identity rooted in pride and belonging. To be Babylonian was to participate in a culture that saw itself as the center of the world, blessed by gods and admired by nations. The grandeur of Marduk's Babylon also radiated outward in the form of conquest and diplomacy. The city was the seat of kings who commanded armies, built alliances, and negotiated with distant powers. Its very name carried weight across the ancient Near East, inspiring both admiration and fear. Envoys and rulers from other lands visited Babylon, walking its avenues and witnessing its splendor firsthand. These encounters reinforced Babylon's reputation as a world capital, a place where the power of kings and the favor of gods converged. Its magnificence was not merely internal but international, shaping the geopolitics of the region and ensuring that Babylon's legacy would endure. Every element of Babylon's grandeur, its monumental walls, sacred temples, glittering gates, and intellectual brilliance, was intertwined with the identity of Marduk, the chief deity who personified order, power, and kingship. The city was his chosen dwelling, and its magnificence was both a reflection of his greatness and a means of honoring him. To speak of Babylon without invoking Marduk would be impossible, for the two were inseparable in the minds of its people. The grandeur of the city was therefore not only political or cultural, but profoundly spiritual, a manifestation of divine will made visible in stone, brick, and ritual. Love and family in a strict society like Babylon 600 years ago reveal much about how human emotions, traditions, and social expectations intertwined in a world shaped by law, religion, and survival. To live in Babylon was to inhabit a society where every aspect of life was touched by the divine and regulated by codes, and within that framework, love and family became both deeply personal and socially binding. Romantic feelings, marriages, family bonds, and even the act of raising children were not left to chance or pure affection, but existed within an intricate web of religious duties, economic needs, and legal contracts. Still, within these boundaries, the people of Babylon found ways to express passion, tenderness, and devotion. And it is in these spaces between duty and desire that we discover the human heart beating beneath the weight of tradition. Marriage was the central institution that defined family life, and in Babylonian society, it was far more than a personal choice. It was a contract. Families arranged marriages to strengthen alliances, secure property, or ensure financial stability, and these unions were typically formalized through written agreements inscribed on clay tablets. A marriage contract could include details about the dowry provided by the bride's family, the obligations of the husband, and the consequences should one party fail in their duties. These documents, preserved for millennia, reveal the seriousness with which Babylonians treated the institution of marriage. Yet, while marriage was built upon legal and economic foundations, it was also accompanied by ceremonies, rituals, and celebrations that infused the union with joy and community spirit. Friends, relatives, and neighbors gathered to witness the joining of two households, and offerings were made to the gods, particularly to Ishtar, the goddess of love and fertility, whose blessing was sought to ensure harmony and prosperity. Although marriages were arranged, love and affection were not absent. Babylonian poetry and myths contain references to passion and desire, often linked to the goddess Ishtar herself, who embodied both the sweetness of love and the volatility of jealousy. Couples could grow deeply attached, sharing the burdens of daily labor, raising children, and honoring the gods together. Archaeological evidence suggests that symbols of affection were exchanged, such as small tokens or personal objects, though these acts of intimacy were shaped by societal expectations. Love was permitted to bloom, but always within the protective walls of duty and order. The freedom to choose one's partner was limited, yet the bonds that grew within arranged marriages could become genuine and profound, as survival and companionship created a shared purpose that united couples beyond the written contracts. Family structure was patriarchal, with the father as the head of the household, responsible for providing for his family, managing property, and ensuring that traditions were upheld. The authority of the father was supported by both custom and law, and children were expected to honor and obey him. Yet women were far from powerless within this structure. A wife's dowry remained legally hers, and she could exercise rights over it even during marriage. In some cases, women could engage in trade, own property, and initiate legal disputes. Widows, in particular, often held considerable independence, managing estates and acting as guardians for their children. This balance between strict patriarchy and certain protections for women reveals a society that, while rigid, recognized the importance of women's roles in sustaining family and community life. Children were treasured, both as sources of labor and as bearers of lineage, but the responsibility of raising them was shared by the entire family. Sons were expected to learn their father's trade or take up roles in administration, agriculture, or the priesthood, while daughters were often prepared for marriage, their dowries carefully planned by their families. Yet children also experienced the warmth of parental affection. Figurines and toys uncovered by archaeologists show that Babylonian children played games, owned dolls, and enjoyed moments of joy even in a world so focused on survival. Parents instilled values of obedience, respect, and devotion to the gods, teaching children through both instruction and example. Stories, myths, and rituals formed part of their upbringing, embedding them in a cultural tradition that connected the household to the greater cosmic order. Love in Babylon was not limited to the family, but was deeply infused into religious life. where devotion to the gods was often described in terms of passion and loyalty. Ishtar, in particular, was central to how Babylonians understood love and desire. Temples dedicated to her hosted rituals that connected fertility, sexuality, and divine blessing. Hymns to the gods sometimes echoed the language of lovers, blurring the line between spiritual devotion and human emotion. For the Babylonians, love was not merely a private feeling, but a cosmic force tied to fertility, abundance, and the continuity of life itself. The society's strictness, then, did not suppress love but sought to channel it in ways that preserved order and honored the divine. Adultery and betrayal were considered serious offenses, both legally and morally, reflecting the importance of loyalty within marriage and family life. The Code of Hammurabi spelled out harsh punishments for adultery, underscoring how seriously the Babylonians regarded the sanctity of marital vows. Fidelity was not merely a matter of personal trust, but of social stability, as marriage tied together families, property, and honor. In contrast, divorce was permitted under certain circumstances, though it too was governed by strict rules. A husband could repudiate his wife, but he was often required to return her dowry, and if the wife was found blameless, she retained rights to property and protection. A wife could also seek separation if her husband failed in his duties, though her ability to do so depended on her social standing and the terms of her marriage contract. These laws highlight how even in the most intimate areas of life, the Babylonians sought to balance personal relationships with legal order. Expressions of romantic affection were not absent from Babylonian culture. Love songs, preserved on clay tablets, speak of longing, admiration, and the beauty of beloveds. These songs often drew on imagery of nature, comparing lovers to gardens, rivers, and stars. While much of Babylonian literature focused on myth, lore, or ritual, these fragments of intimate poetry reveal the softer, more vulnerable side of life in a society often remembered for its strictness. They remind us that beneath the formalities of arranged marriages and the stern codes of law, the human heart still yearned, still celebrated the thrill of closeness, and still expressed itself in words meant to capture fleeting emotions. Family life was also intertwined with the rhythms of survival, and love often revealed itself through acts of care and sacrifice. A husband working long hours in the fields or workshops, a wife managing the household and weaving textiles, parents ensuring that their children had food and shelter. All of these were manifestations of love expressed not in grand declarations, but in daily responsibilities. The strictness of the society did not extinguish affection, but gave it practical forms, weaving it into the fabric of routine. To provide, to protect, and to honor one's family were the deepest expressions of love in a world where survival depended on collective effort. Extended families often lived together or maintained close ties, and kinship networks were vital for support in times of hardship. Grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins all contributed to the strength of the household, and loyalty to kin was a source of pride. These bonds extended beyond blood, as adoption was a recognized practice, ensuring that childless couples could continue their lineage, and that orphans could find protection within a family. Adoption contracts, like marriage contracts, were formalized in writing, showing that even the act of bringing a child into one's home was a structured and sacred commitment. Yet behind these contracts lay genuine human emotion, the desire for companionship, the instinct to nurture, and the hope of securing one's name for future generations. The strict nature of Babylonian society was not meant to deny love, but to safeguard it within boundaries that ensured stability. Love was celebrated in myth, structured in law, expressed in poetry, and lived in the quiet gestures of family life. It existed within the confines of arranged marriages, patriarchal authority, and legal codes, but it was never extinguished by them. Instead, it adapted, finding room in shared responsibilities, parental care, romantic songs, and the rituals that bound individuals to each other and to the gods. In this way, the people of Babylon experienced love as both a private emotion and a public duty, woven into the very structure of a society that sought order above all else. Survival through trade, farming, and law in Babylon 600 years ago was not merely about sustaining life, but about creating a system where human effort, natural resources, and divine order converged to ensure stability in one of the most influential cities of the ancient world. The very existence of Babylon depended on its people's ability to master their environment, regulate their relationships, and channel the fertility of the land and the wealth of commerce into a framework that maintained both prosperity and cosmic harmony. To understand survival in this society is to recognize the delicate balance between agriculture and irrigation, the vast networks of trade that connected Babylon to distant lands, and the strict application of law that bound these activities into a functioning whole. Every Babylonian, whether farmer, merchant, craftsman, or ruler, lived within this web of survival strategies, where success or failure was never individual, but always collective, tied to the rhythms of the river, the cycles of the markets, and the unbending hand of justice. The lifeblood of Babylon's survival was the Euphrates River, which cut through the city and nourished the fertile plains around it. Agriculture was the foundation of Babylonian life, and farming techniques were highly advanced for their time. Farmers used irrigation canals to channel water from the river into their fields, allowing them to cultivate barley, wheat, dates, onions, and a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. The success of these irrigation systems required careful planning and constant maintenance, for floods could destroy crops while droughts could devastate harvests. Communities cooperated to build, clean, and repair canals, and their efforts were often overseen by local officials who ensured that water was distributed fairly. The abundance of food not only sustained Babylon's growing population, but also supported its armies, temples, and monumental building projects, making agriculture the invisible engine that powered the grandeur of the city. Farming, however, was never an isolated activity. It was deeply embedded in social and legal structures that governed how land was owned, how labor was organized, and how disputes were resolved. Much of the farmland belonged to temples, the crown, or wealthy families, and peasants often worked these lands as tenants or laborers. In return, they owed a portion of their harvests as rent or taxes, ensuring that surplus grain flowed into the city's storage facilities. These reserves were essential, not only for feeding the population in lean years, but also for financing trade and military campaigns. The law provided guidelines for every aspect of this system, from the responsibilities of tenant farmers to the penalties for neglecting irrigation duties. The Code of Hammurabi included detailed regulations on agriculture, such as rules for renting fields, compensations for crop damage, and obligations to maintain canals. In this way, survival through farming was never just about planting and harvesting, but about participating in a structured, legally bound relationship that ensured both individual livelihood and communal stability. Trade expanded Babylon's survival beyond its agricultural base, connecting the city to distant lands and bringing in resources that could not be produced locally. Babylon's location on the Euphrates made it a natural hub for commerce, as goods could be transported by riverboats that carried merchants, grain, livestock, and raw materials up and down the waterways. Overland trade routes stretched outward to Anatolia, the Levant, Persia, and beyond, creating networks that brought tin for bronze, precious stones for jewelry, fine textiles, and exotic spices. Babylonian merchants were skilled negotiators, often using silver as a standard of exchange, though barter remained common. Contracts recorded on clay tablets detailed the terms of these exchanges, specifying quantities, prices, delivery dates, and penalties for default. Trade was risky, subject to theft, loss, or fraud, but the presence of written agreements and legal protections gave merchants the confidence to extend their ventures. The markets of Babylon were filled with a diversity of goods that reflected these wide connections, creating a vibrant atmosphere where survival was supported not only by local fields, but by the wealth of the wider world. Craftsmanship was another vital element of Babylon's survival, as artisans transformed raw materials into finished goods that fed both domestic needs and export markets. Metalworkers forged tools and weapons, potters shaped vessels for cooking and storage, weavers produced textiles from wool and flax, and jewelers fashioned intricate ornaments from imported stones and metals. These products supported everyday life, but also reflected the refinement and prestige of Babylonian culture. Craftsmen were often organized into guild-like groups, working under the supervision of temple authorities or wealthy patrons who controlled the flow of resources. Their livelihoods were also regulated by law, which established standards for quality and accountability. For example, if a builder constructed a house that later collapsed and caused harm, the law prescribed severe punishments, sometimes even death. These strict regulations ensured that craftsmanship remained reliable, reinforcing the stability of society by making sure that the goods and structures people depended upon were safe and durable. Law was the backbone that held the entire system of survival together, creating order in a world where disputes could easily disrupt the flow of life. The Code of Hammurabi remains one of the most famous legal collections of the ancient world, and its detailed provisions covered every aspect of survival: farming, trade, labor, family, and justice. The principle of lex talionis, or an eye for an eye, underscored many of its rulings, ensuring that punishments matched the severity of offenses. While some of these laws may appear harsh to modern sensibilities, they served an essential purpose: deterring wrongdoing, protecting property, and maintaining balance in society. Farmers knew that neglecting their irrigation duties could result in fines, merchants knew that fraud could lead to restitution, and craftsmen knew that shoddy work could bring severe consequences. In this way, the law was not merely punitive but preventive, creating an environment where trust could flourish because people understood the rules and the consequences of breaking them. Religion was inseparable from these systems of survival, for the Babylonians believed that the gods themselves governed the success of crops, the fairness of trade, and the integrity of justice. Offerings were made to the gods to ensure fertile fields, safe journeys, and honest dealings. Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon, was seen as the guarantor of order, and his priests played an important role in overseeing the rituals that aligned human activities with divine will. Temples acted not only as religious centers but also as economic hubs, owning land, employing workers, storing surplus grain, and even lending resources. Survival, then, was never merely practical but always spiritual, requiring human effort to be matched by divine favor. Floods, droughts, or pestilence were interpreted as signs of divine displeasure, urging the people to redouble their devotion and ensure that laws and duties were observed. The military dimension of survival was also tied to farming, trade, and law, for Babylon's wealth made it both a prize and a target. Armies needed food supplies, weapons, and logistical support, all of which were provided by the agricultural surplus and the craftsmanship of artisans. Trade brought in materials that strengthened the military, while law ensured that soldiers were recruited, equipped, and disciplined. The survival of Babylon as a political entity depended on its ability to defend itself, and this required the entire society to contribute, whether by farming the fields that fed the soldiers, forging the weapons they wielded, or paying the taxes that funded campaigns. War and survival were deeply connected, and victories in battle often translated into more resources, new trade routes, and greater security for the city. Daily life in Babylon reflected these systems in subtle but profound ways. A farmer rising at dawn to check his fields, a merchant negotiating with a foreign trader, a craftsman carefully shaping a pot, a scribe recording the terms of a contract. All were engaged in acts of survival that bound them to one another through networks of obligation, trust, and regulation. Even small disputes, such as a quarrel over the boundaries of a field or a disagreement over payment for goods, could ripple outward to affect the entire community, which is why law and custom played such a crucial role in settling conflicts. Survival was never individual but collective, requiring cooperation and the willingness to submit to systems larger than oneself. Yet within this collective framework, individuals could find opportunities to prosper, gain prestige, and secure better lives for their families. The economic rhythms of the city were also marked by festivals and religious calendars, which influenced when planting began, when trade caravans set out, and when debts were repaid. These cycles gave structure to survival, linking practical activities to sacred time. During the Akitu festival, for example, rituals celebrated the renewal of the world, reinforcing the idea that survival was not merely about human effort, but about aligning with cosmic forces. The blending of law, labor, and ritual created a holistic vision of survival, where every act, whether sowing seeds, weighing silver, or swearing an oath, carried both practical and spiritual significance. The resilience of Babylonian survival strategies lay in their adaptability. Floods could destroy crops, enemies could disrupt trade, and internal strife could challenge order, yet the systems of agriculture, commerce, and law were flexible enough to absorb shocks and continue functioning. Storage facilities ensured reserves during hard times, trade networks diversified sources of wealth, and legal codes provided mechanisms for resolving disputes. This adaptability was a form of strength, allowing Babylon to endure and flourish despite the uncertainties of the ancient world. The very survival of the city, and its ability to expand into a center of power and culture, was rooted in this combination of practical systems and the belief that these systems were upheld by divine authority. Daily rituals shaping ordinary lives in Babylon 600 years ago, reveal how every moment of existence, from waking at dawn to resting at night, was intertwined with religion, custom, and the rhythms of survival. Life was not lived randomly, but carefully ordered by traditions passed down through generations, ensuring that individuals and families acted in harmony with the gods, their community, and the laws of their society. For the people of Babylon, ritual was not something reserved only for grand festivals or temple ceremonies. It was embedded in the ordinary flow of time, shaping meals, work, prayer, cleanliness, family duties, and even the way people interacted with neighbors and strangers. By understanding these rituals, we can step closer to the daily heartbeat of a civilization that believed its survival depended not only on farming, trade, and law, but also on maintaining order through consistent, repeated acts of devotion and discipline. The day often began with offerings to the gods, for no Babylonian would think of starting their tasks without first acknowledging divine power. In many households, small clay figurines of deities or protective spirits stood in corners or niches, and before setting out to fields, workshops, or markets, families would pour libations of water, wine, or beer and whisper prayers seeking favor. These acts were modest compared to the grandeur of temple rituals, but they carried the same weight of belief, for even the smallest household prayer was thought to echo upward to the gods. Farmers prayed for fertile fields, artisans for steady hands, merchants for honest dealings, and parents for the health of their children. The ritualized beginning of each day reinforced the idea that no human effort could succeed without divine blessing. Cleanliness was another aspect of daily ritual, as purity was closely associated with spiritual protection. Washing with water before meals, after labor, or before entering sacred spaces was common, and water itself was regarded as a gift of the gods. In Babylon, where the Euphrates flowed as both a physical and symbolic lifeline, washing one's hands or face was more than hygiene. It was an act that aligned body and soul with order. Priests in particular followed elaborate purification rituals, washing repeatedly before performing sacrifices or handling sacred objects. But ordinary people imitated these habits in simpler forms, believing that cleanliness helped guard against illness and spiritual harm. These small rituals of washing, often repeated several times a day, served as reminders of the connection between health, morality, and divine favor. Meals, too, carried ritual meaning. Bread and beer were staples, and their preparation and consumption were often accompanied by prayers of thanks. Families gathered in their courtyards or small rooms to share meals, with roles and etiquette shaped by tradition. The head of the household typically received the first portion, symbolizing both respect and order within the family. Special meals were prepared during festivals, when food was also offered to the gods before being shared among the community. The ritual of eating together reinforced bonds, ensured fairness in distribution, and reminded everyone that even the act of sustaining the body was sacred. Food was not merely fuel, it was a gift to be respected, blessed, and consumed in ways that reflected gratitude and balance. Work itself was ritualized, for whether one was plowing a field, weaving cloth, or recording contracts on clay tablets, tasks followed patterns learned from elders and reinforced by community expectations. Farmers observed the cycles of the moon and stars, believing that celestial patterns influenced the right time to sow or harvest. Craftsmen offered prayers before beginning their work, especially when creating objects destined for temples or households seeking divine protection. Scribes, whose role in recording laws and contracts was vital, often began their writing by invoking Nabu, the god of wisdom and writing, to ensure clarity and truth in their records. These repetitive invocations and gestures transformed labor into a sacred duty, elevating ordinary work into acts of devotion that linked individuals to a larger cosmic purpose. Rituals of social interaction also shaped daily life. Greetings were not casual, but carried formulaic expressions that conveyed respect and goodwill. To greet someone properly was to acknowledge not only the individual, but also the gods who watched over both parties. Exchanges in the marketplace, though filled with bargaining and haggling, were bounded by customs that reflected fairness and mutual obligation. Contracts were sealed with oaths sworn before deities, transforming trade into a ritualized act of trust. Even acts of hospitality, such as offering bread and water to a guest, were infused with ritual. For to welcome a stranger was to honor the gods of protection and to maintain one's reputation in the community. Failure to observe these social rituals could bring shame or suspicion, while their faithful observance strengthened bonds of loyalty and respect. Festivals provided the most visible and communal expressions of daily ritual, even though they were not everyday occurrences. The Akitu festival, celebrating the new year, was among the most significant, involving processions, sacrifices, and dramatic rituals of renewal. During these events, kings themselves participated in symbolic acts, such as humbling themselves before Marduk to affirm their role as servants of divine will. Ordinary citizens joined in the celebrations through feasting, music, and prayer, blending sacred ritual with communal joy. While such festivals marked special times of the year, their impact lingered in daily life, as the stories told, songs sung, and offerings made reinforced the rituals that people carried into their ordinary routines. The boundaries between festival and daily life blurred, for both expressed the same principle that survival depended on continuous alignment with cosmic order. Family life was infused with rituals that shaped the roles of parents, children, and extended kin. Birth was surrounded by protective incantations and offerings to ward off evil spirits, ensuring that the newborn entered the world under divine favor. Mothers performed rituals of nursing and care that blended instinct with tradition, whispering prayers as they fed and bathed their infants. Fathers performed acts of teaching and discipline that were also seen as ritual duties, for raising children was not only a personal responsibility, but a spiritual obligation to pass on the values, laws, and customs that kept society in balance. Marriage, too, extended beyond the legal contract into daily rituals of respect and care between husband and wife, often expressed in gestures such as shared meals, offerings to household gods, and the management of domestic spaces. Death, when it came, was met with rituals of mourning, burial, and remembrance, ensuring that the spirit of the departed found peace, and that the living maintained harmony with the ancestors. Every stage of family life was thus framed by acts that blended necessity with sacred meaning. Dreams and omens played an important role in daily ritual, as Babylonians believed that the gods spoke through signs in the natural world. People recorded dreams, observed the behavior of animals, and studied the movement of stars and planets to discern messages from the divine. Ritual specialists, such as diviners and astrologers, were often consulted to interpret these signs, and their guidance influenced decisions ranging from farming schedules to trade ventures. Ordinary people also developed personal rituals to protect themselves from misfortune, such as carrying amulets, reciting protective prayers, or arranging household objects in symbolic ways. These small acts of ritual shaped daily routines, providing comfort and a sense of control in a world filled with uncertainty. Even leisure was touched by ritual, for games, music, and storytelling were not simply entertainment, but often carried symbolic and moral lessons. Children's toys, such as clay figurines and board games, reflected adult values, teaching them cooperation, strategy, and respect for order. Music accompanied religious rituals, but also filled domestic life, with songs passed down through generations carrying echoes of myth and devotion. Storytelling, especially the recitation of epic tales like that of Gilgamesh, was both a ritual of entertainment and a transmission of cultural memory, reminding listeners of the values of courage, loyalty, and respect for the gods. Leisure activities, like all others, were therefore infused with ritual patterns that reinforced identity and belonging. The legal system itself was deeply ritualized in daily practice. Trials, disputes, and judgments were not informal proceedings, but carefully ordered acts carried out in the presence of elders, scribes, and sometimes priests. Oaths sworn before gods gave weight to testimony, and punishments carried symbolic meaning as much as practical deterrence. For ordinary people, the knowledge that the law was not arbitrary but bound by ritual procedure gave a sense of stability and trust. Just as washing, eating, and praying followed ritual patterns, so too did justice, ensuring that even conflict was resolved within the framework of divine order. Architecture and domestic space reinforced daily ritual as well. Houses were arranged around courtyards that served as centers of family ritual, where meals were shared, offerings were made, and children played under the watchful eyes of their elders. Temples and shrines dotted the city, providing spaces where individuals could step out of daily routines and engage in more formal acts of devotion. Public spaces, such as marketplaces and gates, were also sites of ritual, where people not only traded goods, but affirmed their social bonds through greetings, oaths, and shared customs. The very design of Babylon reflected an understanding that ritual was not confined to temples but woven into every street, home, and gathering place. The rhythm of time itself was shaped by ritual, with days, months, and years marked by cycles of offerings, prayers, and festivals. The Babylonians developed sophisticated calendars based on lunar and solar cycles, ensuring that rituals were performed at the right moments to align human life with cosmic order. Farmers planted according to these calendars, merchants timed their journeys, and priests scheduled sacrifices, all guided by the belief that survival depended on synchronizing earthly actions with celestial patterns. This structuring of time created predictability in daily life, transforming the uncertainties of existence into a sequence of known and trusted rituals that connected the individual to the cosmos.